night somewhere in the world doing something like this, and this is one of my favorites. This is on the world's most astonishing food, which is chocolate, which came into my life in a very surreptitious fashion. How's our English here? Pretty good, isn't it? I'm so glad to be here, by the way. Incredible. Thank you, guys. But this food came into my life in a very interesting way. And so this is the story of how I got into it, and then what's happened since that time, and then where we're going. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the history of chocolate, and then we're going to get into, we're going to go across the ocean, and we're going to go back to kind of chocolate's origins. And that'll make sense when we get there. And we're going to talk about a legend of cacao, and then we'll invoke the Cacao God, and this party is going to start. Who's ready to dance at this party? Yeah. All right. This is great. It's great to be back here. Now, I normally don't use sticks. I've been a drummer for 20-some years, 27 years maybe, 28 years. A guy across the hall from me in college played the drums, and I really wanted to play those drums. So I just will do this because it's what I do, and it's just fun for me, and it's experimental. I'm trying to figure out some way to make use of all this, but I do it while I'm walking down the street. I do it for fun, so I'm going to do it here in front of you just for fun. Is that cool? Okay. It has no meaning. It's just getting the wheels turning, if you know what I'm talking about. All right. I was in Maui. Anybody been to Hawaii?
Not yet.
Maui's pretty amazing, especially when you first go there, because the thing you want to get into is you want to get into the mana of the place. Like the waterfalls, like you get into that wild water coming off of Haleakala Crater, and you like get completely, it transforms you. And that's one of the most amazing things about Hawaii. There are places like that, and Maui has those places. So we used to do that. That was like a big thing. I was in California, and we'd go to Maui to kind of break out of the kind of the Southern California pollution story and the traffic. And next thing I know, I'm in these wild places in Maui. A friend of mine shows up with 3 cacao beans. I had no idea what it was. I said, what is this? He said, it's like a chocolate-like thing. You just kind of peel them and you throw them into a smoothie. Next time I saw him, it was 10. Next time, it was 300. At that point, we were all sitting around peeling these things and then throwing them into smoothies. And back then, the superhero superfood smoothie was wild coconuts, wild coconut water, spirulina, wild local honey. What else we throw in there? That was pretty much the base, and then these cacao beans. That's what was going in there. I didn't know what chocolate was, no idea any of this stuff at all. We're peeling them one night, and we got 300, and so we're peeling them, we're just like doing like, all of a sudden it's 20 in the drink, and then 30 in the drink, and then 40 in the drink, just seeing what the limits are. My limit's over 100, the best I've ever seen in a night's over 200 by one person. One of my favorite times ever actually doing this was, I was in a reality TV show, and we had these guys in a cage. All of them, all like 7 of them who were left at that time, and they were all in a cage, and then there was a cage on top of that, and a cage on top of that, and a cage on top of that on a freezing cold night in Los Angeles, and I was a judge there on the show, and I was eating cacao beans. I ate about 80 that night. And what it was those people in the 7, as soon as someone wimped out, they're out. And then everybody moves up to the next level. As soon as somebody whips out and says, I can't do this, they're out, and it goes up to the next level until there's 2 left at the very, very top. Freezing cold Los Angeles. Incredible battle of wills, actually. It was an amazing night. So I hit 80 that night, and somewhere in that little run there, I did about 120. That's my best ever. Anyway, so we're into this thing, putting cacao beans in there, and then at some point, one of my friends says to me, a really dear friend and a very close friend who I recently reconnected with after 10 years, and it's just because he was there that first day, and we'd have that connection of like, you saw what happened to chocolate in that time. And he said, did you ever just eat one? And I said, no, I never ate one. And so the next one I peeled, I ate it. Now, I've been a raw food vegan at that point for 10 years. I didn't have any chocolate since I was 14 years old. I didn't even know I had no idea what chocolate was, anything. I've been eating basically food that was like, kind of a nightmare, right? Just like seeds, nuts, vegetables, and fruits. That's it. Not even much seaweed back in those days. And all of a sudden, this taste comes in my mouth. I'm like, what in the world is this? What is this? This exists. This is the flavor of single cacao bean. And I think all of that experience of being a raw foodist and all that, it kind of opened me up to see it as it is, right? Instead of the roasting, processing, smelting, factories, machines, winnowers, all that stuff. That then they cut out almost all the cacao butter and it goes to cosmetic companies. And what we get is like a smattering of cacao powder with like some cacao oil that's cut with vegetable oil, and that was the chocolate bars we grew up on. So that's where I came from. And all of a sudden I'm like, what in the world? So then I started digging into what in the hell this thing is. Here's what it is. Cacao is the most widely eaten nut in the world that nobody ever eats. Everybody processes it into chocolate bars. And it was in that way. With God knows what kind of milk sugars being put in there, God knows what was in it, really. And then all of a sudden it was like I was brought back to square one of what this thing is, and I was like, I need to investigate this immediately. And I spent 24 hours straight reading every book, going through every website, just getting in touch with what this thing is. And from that point on, the raw cacao thing started. That's where the whole thing started, right at that moment. And then it just blew up from there. And Shazzy was with me that night, if you know her in the UK, and she was there at that moment and what happened at that moment. And it was an amazing time. I mean, my whole life it was like this. The Cacao God appeared and said, you want to touch the lives of millions of people, you stick with the wheatgrass enemas. If you want to touch the lives of billions of people, you need to get on board with me. And I basically signed. That's what happened. And it was amazing. So we find out that what chocolate really is, it's the most nutritious food in the world. It's so nutritious that in the jungle environment, we have a very, we think jungle, we think Hawaii, and it's like kind of a play school jungle. It's not really a jungle. It's like kind of a playground. When you get into the wild jungle, like where there's boa constrictors that could drop on you in that kind of jungle like the Amazon, at that point, if you find a fruit tree, you are happier than you could ever believe. And if you find a cacao tree, you've got a lot of food all of a sudden. And that's why it was so valuable. In the jungle, it's the most valuable, most nutritious thing going. And interesting, those of you who have kind of followed this whole nutrition field, I'm going to say something, it's a theme I like to talk about. I don't know why, but I think you should know it. And that is, there appears to be two areas in the whole field of all food where the superfoods and the super herbs are positioned. They're either at the very beginning of the food chain as pioneers, or they're at the very end. When the whole thing's been built up, the soil's been built up, the forests have stood there, everything's in its right cycle, and it's been going on for thousands of years, then you'll have a nut tree like a cacao tree. Then you'll have tobacco. Then you'll have cannabis. It can grow in that level of richness. Otherwise, you have to fake it, right? Which is what most farmers are doing. They're trying to make that soil for their tobacco, trying to make it like a jungle would make it and does it naturally. And that's that's a little side thing I just wanted to say, is that these medicines come from those two extremes. And cacao is on this extreme. But what's interesting about it is it's an alchemical substance. And this is how it had always been used. And this is the thing about cacao that is so amazing and so different from what we grew up with. And that is, cacao delivers the superfoods. Great, medicinal mushrooms are great. Reishi mushrooms, great. Chaga mushrooms, great. Spirulina is fantastic. Coconut's wonderful. All this stuff's great, but when you put it with chocolate, it's a whole nother thing. And why not the raw material? And so we started experimenting with the raw material and what that raw material does to you. What is it? It's the highest ever of any food in the world in magnesium. That's a scientific fact. It's also the highest in chromium. So for blood sugar, that keeps you stable. So that means if you're in the jungle, you got no other food. You have food if you have cacao. You can go and go and go and go and go. It's valuable like money, and it was money. It was money. So it's the highest in magnesium, highest in chromium. It's at the highest of anything, of any nut in phosphorus, which means bones. Chocolate eaters live the longest. It's a fact. Right? You saw it recently. This woman is vying out of Mexico to be the oldest woman in the world. She's 127 years old. They asked her, how did you get there? Chocolate. You guys have been hearing me saying that for years. It'll come up again and again and again. One of the reasons why I think that is because chocolate eaters have stronger bones. They'll last longer. And it's just something you need to check out. If you look at every metaphor of what chocolate does, chocolate then must also be good for your teeth, which are bones. And there probably isn't a better food for your teeth than chocolate. It's the best food for your teeth also. Look into it. Research it. And it just goes on like this. Like, what in the world is this stuff? I was in a little coffee shop right on the other side of the Dam Square. I don't know which way that is. I think it's actually east. In 2003, and I'm talking to the owner of this coffee shop, really interesting character. He was British, and I said, what are you going to do after this? We were in a kind of a deep conversation about life and philosophy and everything. I said, what are you going to do after this coffee shop? And he said, oh, I'm going to buy a cacao farm and move to like Nicaragua. And I went, what? So I started a cacao farm in 2006. Through much trial and tribulation, by the way, very difficult, thing to manage that kind of stuff. But we now got it all the way going. So if I'm talking about chaga, I'm talking about reishi mushroom or cacao or spirulina, it's because I've either grown it or I've been there. You know what I mean? I'm not just like babbling on, oh, like this thing chocolate's a great idea. It's like I don't really feel like I'm qualified to talk about it unless I grow it. Then I'm qualified. Certain things I found out about growing cacao too. You put it in the ground, you get it going. The traditional way of planting it is this. You sprout them up in the village. Once they get about that big, a year old, you walk out in the jungle, you find a suitable spot, you pop it in. That's how it's done. That's how almost all the cacao in the world comes like that, except for Brazil, where they tried to clear cut the forest down and then plant the cacao out in the open, and it got all these diseases, and then somehow they miraculously found out that those diseases would go away as soon as those cacaos were planted in the jungle. I don't get it. It's just like that kind of world. By the way, I'm escaping this world, and I'm getting to an old growth chocolate planet. That's my goal. You guys might have a different goal, but if you want to ask me what my goal is, that's it. We're either stealing a spaceship's coming down here, we're building one, something. But I'm getting on a ship and I'm getting out of here. That's my goal. Anyway. Yeah, I fired that off fast. Everybody's like going, wait, old growth chocolate planet. I like that. Can I go? Well, it took me a long time to come to that one. An old growth chocolate planet. Sounds like the best news ever to me. Now this cacao bean is an alchemist, so it likes to be mixed with other things. And this is why now just starting, because we went through that first phase of like, okay, chocolate's back. Thank God carob's over. What a nightmare that was. I'm just going to leave that one alone. And then we started going, oh, maybe we can mix it with goji berries. I would do whole lectures, talk about celery till I was green, cucumbers, this, juices, all this kind of stuff. I'd spend 10 minutes talking about cacao and goji berries. I'd see those people 3 months later and they'd say, you know, I'm on your cacao goji berry diet. And I kind of like it. Never heard any of the other stuff. They just heard the cacao and goji berries, which is interesting. I started learning after a while. It's like, what am I talking about lettuce for? I like lettuce a lot, but I'm not going to be talking about that anymore. Chocolate's better. So all of a sudden, we get to this point of like, whoa, wait, we can mix it with stuff, and then comes along, all the superfoods, traditional superfood additives. For example, cacao and spirulina have been mixed together for 10,000 years. Just so you know that. Like in the Valley of Mexico, and when you go there, it's like spirulina is a known quantity there. It still comes up out of the ground. It's like it's permanent there. And they used to originally, like when Cortez, man, oh my God, what a book. I got a book to recommend. The Conquest of Mexico by Prescott, the English language version of one of the most incredible stories of all time. I don't know what you ever heard about the Conquest of Mexico or Cortez, who came to Mexico from Spain. But the real story is the most incredible story of all time, ever. It's not at all what you think it is. And it blew my mind. It was one of the most incredible reads I've had in the last 10 years, was this story. Cortez was the one who came to finally in the Valley of Mexico in Tenochtitlan and came first into contact with cacao for real, because they were using it as money. It was their currency. Even Columbus wrote that. He's like, these people are crazy about almonds. If they drop one, they'll jump for it. A cacao bean is an almond with good looks and money. Once you get that about it, you're like, okay, got it. Got that download. I found that in a journal that I'd written some years ago. And I was going through old journals, and all of a sudden, there it is. A cacao bean is an almond with good looks and money. I thought that was hilarious and on target with what this stuff is. It's a delivery vehicle. Then comes along, after the superfoods and the spirulina, when you kind of rediscovered all that, then comes along chaga. Chaga mushroom, right? And then this whole thing about where chaga comes from, the circumboreal forest of the world, the whole thing of reishi mushroom, and it's present in every ecosystem that is forested on Earth. I've had friends, lots of them, tell me this story. I searched all through the state of Arizona, up and down, back and forth. I hunted the wilds of Arizona to find reishi mushroom, and I only found it in one place, at the spring, where the water comes out. Only, and nowhere else in the whole state of Arizona. Stuff like that. I hear those stories. We were just in Finland. Christopher was at a sacred spring, and he brought me back pictures of the mushrooms that were growing out of the log that was in the spring. And I was like, dude, that's reishi mushroom. He's like, and then he tells me, guess where it was growing? And I said, out of the spring? He said, yep, right out of the spring. How does it know? The cacao reishi combination is also extremely ancient, goes back thousands of years. We think about reishi mushroom, maybe we think Chinese medicine, that connection. Reishi was almost hunted to extinction in Europe. It's illegal to pick it here because it was almost hunted by your ancestors to extinction. So if you think it was just valuable in China, it's always been valuable. It's intrinsically valuable. And the symbol in Aztec cosmology of the mushroom and the cacao together is a circle with a dot in the middle, which is the European symbol of the sun. That's an ancient combination. So then eventually on Shaga, because we've been doing the Shaga, I've been on that 8 years, the Shaga cacao combination. I have a guy analyze cacao and Shaga in the best lab in North America for sure, probably in the world. It's a food laboratory, Maxim Analytics in north of Toronto. And this is what happened to him. I wasn't the first person to send him samples of Shaga. Somebody had been sending him samples of this stuff. He's been testing food for 32 years. He gets this stuff in his machine that tests 60 minerals to parts per quadrillion, and he's like, this is the most unbelievable thing ever. It's the highest in zinc, it's the highest in potassium, rubidium, cesium, all this stuff, it doesn't matter what it is. But then he tells me that the cacao, based on what it has in it, would be like a perfect fit. And I was like, oh, Rami, isn't that a fact? It's a perfect fit based on the minerals. They fit like this. That's so amazing. That's so amazing. What an amazing thing about herbalism. You can't get that medicine in your body unless it tastes good. It's in chocolate, you'll eat it. Right? That's the reality. Otherwise, you're going to have stuff, bottles of weird stuff that some herbalist made for you, or naturopath, or OMD, right? Chinese doctor or something. It's up in the corner of your cabinet, tucked away behind the toaster. You never ate it. But here, all of a sudden, you can actually get this thing going, and it's going through your body. And you're like, I'm actually ingesting this stuff. It's like you're going through bags of chocolate and cacao powder and stuff like that, right? You guys ever done this? Or superfoods, like you're actually going through it. It's like all of a sudden you're changing the flow of information coming into your body by changing your diet, and it gradually starts to displace out all the other stuff that just really isn't the best ever. Now, chocolate comes to us in a really interesting way. And the legend and lore about it is really interesting. I believe there was a time before this civilization, before the last 10,000 years, where the earth was destroyed in a flood. And there's a lot of evidence of that. And there was a civilization before that. Apparently, cacao comes after the flood. This is the story. There was a tribe. They had a legend about cacao. And it was one of my favorites. When I was really researching cacao, I was like, this is the one that I want to tell people. This is the one I like. What is it? It's a story about a small group, a small tribe. They were super happy. They were in the original earth. Before every animal had been killed, everything had been cut down, the whole forest had been ruined, everything was still brand new. So they were stoked. They could feel the ecstasy coming through the earth. And they started to actually have so much prosperity that they set themselves up in this beautiful river delta right next to the ocean. So they had fresh water, they had ocean, they had a great spot, and they made a nice, just like this, a nice little town square area. And in this town square area, they set up all their huts around, just like that, all the way around this little town square area. And they prospered and they grew, and they were fishing, they were hunting down different things out of the forest, they were foraging berries. They're basically having the best day ever. And they prospered, they grew, and eventually they ran into another group that was also very happy. Oh, it's empty. Anybody have any little water? Coconut water. I can wait. Thank you. Or no, how about this? The most best chocolate smoothie superfood thing you got up there. Please. So they started interacting with this other group. They were having a great time. They built bridges over the river. They planted stuff together. They got along, they expanded, they became one big tribe. Everything was going so good. Eventually they started making boats. They started having pathways through the forest. They even found a way up into the mountains, a great spot where they could look down and see their beautiful society. And then the numbers grew. Then they ran into a whole nother, thank you so much, what do we have here? Coconut water, thank you. Then they ran into another pretty big village. It was basically a town at that point, kind of like them, and they decided they were going to barter and trade things. So they came up with their little shells and things they picked out of the forest and seeds and this and that, and they traded it with these guys over here, and they got little arrows, little bows, and they got all kinds of little cool little knickknacks. And there was a whole thriving little trade going on. I like the idea of barter, by the way. Some of the greatest gifts, literally a gift that saved my dad's life, came to me as a trade, as a barter 19 years ago. It got me on a certain track of thought. I followed it out all these years, and all these years later, I think it really actually saved my dad's life recently. From a trade. Somebody wants to trade you something, I'd say take it. So they were trading, and so everybody was happy. Trades are happy, right? You're like, hey, I made this, and you go, you know, I made that, and you guys trade. Isn't that fun? Thank you. But then, things got a little bit crazy because there were so many of them. All of a sudden, next thing you know, there was like 2 little cities going on. And then one day, one woman, she had a dream. She had a dream that someone stole something from her. Such was sown the seeds of dissent. She was confused. She went to see the local town shaman. He threw a bunch of feathers at her, blew some tobacco smoke, boom, it was gone. Everything was good again. Next thing you know, in the other town, somebody found out that something had actually been stolen. Something she'd been working on was suddenly gone. She'd put months of work into it, gone. Nobody could find out what happened. But the fingers pointed across the water, down the coast, maybe it was them. Next thing you know, something was missing in the other town. Gone, just like that. Something stolen. Pretty soon, distrust percolated the atmosphere. Next thing you know, there was police. Somebody to watch at night to make sure no one was stealing anything. But that quickly built up into, maybe it's them. Maybe we send the police over there, and suddenly there was an army. But they were still trading, things were going well, it was going back and forth. This was all kind of under the surface. But the next thing after that was suddenly some of those resources that were going to food, going to agriculture, going back into land, suddenly went into making just a few extra weapons that might be needed because of them. And the same was happening on the other side. They're looking back going, maybe they're the problem. Them out there. So this went back and forth, and pretty soon there was some pretty powerful conflicts. There was a group living in the original town, right in that beautiful like town square circle area, and they said, you know what, let's go up in the hills, take a walk. Maybe we should kind of set ourselves up there a little bit. And so gradually, maybe once a month, they'd go up there, and then the next thing you know, it was like, let's stay up here for a few months. And things kept getting bigger down below. Suddenly there was forest gone, mowed down. Suddenly there was pollution in the river. They couldn't actually drink the river water without boiling it. Suddenly there was the thought that maybe it wasn't as good as before. Hope was being lost. And the hippies were like, you know what, we're going to just tiptoe up there and hang out up in the mountains. They planted great trees. They set up some nice caves to live in. There was spring water nearby. They had all the amenities. So they were able to survive up there. And the hustle and bustle of the city environment, the ships that were suddenly being developed to go see what they were doing, was burdening the system so much that eventually the fight broke out. Them against us against them. And the hippies at that point were like, we're good up here. the pollution got worse, the conflict got worse, blood was shed. Nobody was satisfied with what was going on. It was a complete loss every direction. But they kept doing it anyway. And this went on and on and on until one day the hippies were out on a golden morning overlooking the entire valley, the river now polluted, the decimated forest, the hustle and bustle of people, the ships in the harbor, and the water receded all the way back. And then came all the way forward in scenes that we've now seen all over the internet. Apocalyptic scenes that completely wiped out both those civilizations. Took them completely out. Meanwhile, up in the mountain, everything's fine. After a few weeks of just dealing with the horror of what they'd seen, they decided to send an expedition to go back down there and see what had happened. They get down near the village, near the original square, circle, center of the old village. They get close. It's evening. All of a sudden, a bright light comes down from the sky. It shines through the forest, blinding them. They hide behind the trees and decide to wait till morning. In the morning, everything's clear. They notice in the middle of that circle, right in the town square, there are two trees that are suddenly there. In all the decimation, chaos, debris, there are suddenly two trees there. One of them is a calabash tree. And the calabash allows you to create the cacao drink because it's your natural cup. It creates a natural cup. It's like a gourd that grows on a tree. And the other one is the cacao tree. And the legend says that the cacao tree is there to teach us how to live in harmony with the jungle. So we work with the jungle instead of disturbing it. We nourish the jungle instead of depleting it. We put our food into the jungle so the jungle also gets that protection, knowing it will not be cut down, because cacao is like the mother, the protector. And when it's planted in there, indigenous people do not move. They stay there because their money's there. It's their economy. And cacao and acai are the best things for the rainforest. That's a fact. And that will actually end up saving the last 10% of the Amazonian rainforest. The cacao farms and the acai farms. What a great combination together those are. Such an amazing combination together. And what an ancient, all the way back to the beginning of time, that those two have been eaten together. That's a nice one to know. Whole different breakfast ideas. The cacao tree teaches us how to live in harmony with the jungle. Now, some of you may know that cacao is actually from Central America, South America, depending on who you believe. And that the original contact with Cortez brought cacao actually back to Europe in 1528, relatively recently. The Spanish were shuttling back and forth ships full of cacao for the Spanish royalty, for actually all the royalty of Europe. It was the in thing. It was like the coffee shop or sugar. It was like something that was like an amazing new discovery, and very few people knew about it. In 1580, a Spanish galleon sailed from Hispaniola, which is present-day Dominican Republic, all the way across to Africa with two baby cacao trees. And they were planted on a little island off the coast of Africa called Fernando Po, or Bioko. And that started the whole revolution of bringing cacao to the original African jungles, where there's a story around cacao, and actually the name cacao itself, the word itself, apparently comes from this. That thousands of years ago, African people had sailed across the Atlantic into present-day Veracruz, Mexico. Which, if you talk to the people there, they will tell you that there's always been African people here long before slavery or any of that. They've been there. They're Olmecs. And we know that because their heads are found in the jungle, the big heads, and they have African features. They're Africans. It's obvious. There it is. The Mayans got the word cacao from them. That's where the word comes from. They were the original keepers of the Cacao God, or the cacao spirit, or the cacao tree. And they had originally come from Africa, and then all of a sudden, all these years later, it all came back. It went back to Africa, and currently, Ghana and the Ivory Coast are the largest cacao producing countries in the world. Now, when you get into those countries, cacao, like it was originally in Central America, it still is sacred, like to all the kids. And so there's a song that they sing that's about the cacao. And we're going to sing it together. You guys ready? Who's ready? All right. You guys ready? Here's how it goes. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. Imajoda. Here's how we're going to do it. I'll sing the line and you guys just come in it. Okay? We're going to start out. Piña Ebo. Okay, you guys are going to repeat. Here we go. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. 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 You guys ready? Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. 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 Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. 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 Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. 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 Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Piña Ebo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Ippe Jumbo. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Que le majameda. Imajoda. 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 Here we walk in the forest with our favorite, the spirit of the jungle, cacao, the chocolate. Here we walk in the forest with our favorite, the spirit of the jungle, cacao, the chocolate. You guys ready to start this party? We invite in the Cacao God from the jungles into this space tonight to dance with us, to switch us on, to imbibe the sacred brew into these sacred bodies, and have the best night ever.